Hello, SGD, Sacred Geometry Decoded. This will be Science of the Symbols Part 18. And previous episode I went into the Southern Hemisphere constellations. These were at least officially named between the 15 to the 1800s and all the drawn connections. But, so there we see Stellarium screenshot. And so what's happened is, as I showed in previous episodes, we've lost a few constellations. Some have been redesigned. So, for instance, Indus is now more of your American Indian. If we see the original Indus, it was more of your Amazon type, I would suppose you'd call it. But now the connections. Previous episode I went into. Let's go back. So we had Parvo and the Indus and Indus constellation. Best to look at this one. And Parvo and Ara here. So we had these two. Previous episode went into the Greek gods, these legends, and how they incorporate information, stories, and especially, well, you can use them for many aspects, alchemy, but also has a star chart, astronomy, geometry, arithmetic, and music, and alchemy, and weights and measures come in that and bring these things all together. And Hermes to the Greeks, Mercury to the Romans, the god of a trickster, but he was a god of knowledge, but he was also a god of commerce, weights and measures, and travelers. What do commercial travelers need? Weights and measures to sell their goods, but also they need navigation. And he was also the god of knowledge, so very similar into as with Thoth in Egypt. This knowledge of weights and measures for angles, geometry, these aspects are essential in building the building trade. So whether it was the cathedrals, the great temples of Greco-Roman times, or the pyramids, the same gods, the same aspects have, they're the scientists, let's just call them. And of course, to that is connected alchemy and metallurgy, and to build the tools, the chisels, all the different things that connected. And these will also all be told here. And again, this is one portion of the Southern Hemisphere constellation. So this shot, I think the location was basically on the South Pole, looking down. Now, for instance, Crux, the cross, that's the Southern Cross, as we call it. Here in Australia, we can't see the North Star. We have the Southern Cross. It's on our flag. That's our North Star down here in the Southern Hemisphere. And so that's from this position. That's why it's pretty much, in the dead center, because this would be, now obviously Antarctica doesn't look like this. This is just a generic background that Stellarium uses. But we got, so Ara and Parvo, the Greek gods in these stories. Now, in this one, we'll be looking at especially Freemasonic symbols. Now, Freemasons, all their symbols are symbols of the old craft, of the temple builders, the cathedral builders, the dividers, hammers, chisels, and as you can see, this it's partially obscured, this triangle with the level. That's a level there, and these different tools for cutting. Now, for instance, these type. Okay, I won't get into that, but now a Freemason board. We have the compass. We have a level there. Have another level there. It's to find the horizontal level. This instrument is to find the vertical level. We have the square. We have the multiple compasses, a ruler, chisels, the ashlar, the mallet. These, the hammer. These are all symbols, legacy of the older craft guilds, of the people who built the temples, the cathedrals, the major public buildings. They're into their geometry and their science. That was an essential part of the trade. Now, in the modern sense, it's all been put into ritual and symbol, but there are strong, dedicated to engineering and the sciences. These are all connected. Now, I'll be using mainly this board to explain this, but because there's slight variations, but we have basically the same elements. Now, I've also been mentioning the work of Kircher frequently. This is one of his drawings. We'll be drawing on this a lot as well. And also worth mentioning, so previous episodes I talked about, so the papal symbol of the triple crown and the silver and the gold key, the alchemical wedding, the triple crown of a hierophant, which goes back to the ancient Eleusinian mysteries and these strong connections to Mithras, And these other cults, well, this particular Mason board, we also have the Triple Crown and the keys most often associated with the Pope, but it's not a papal symbol because the Pope and these other people have drawn on ancient mysteries, the ancient systems of knowledge, and those who kept the secrets, so to speak. Now, so we'll just begin. So Libra, one of the constellations of the zodiac. So, for instance, in your astronomy in the newspaper, that's Libra. There we see an older piece of art, and we can find that in the tracing board there as well. So what you find is the symbols of the craft, of the old science and engineering in there. Libra. Now next to Libra we have Norma. That is from the Latin word normal, which means a right angle. But it's this was one of the constellations named in the late 1700s by a French astronomer. I can't recall his name. But especially between the 1500s to the 15 to the 1700s, you had the age of exploration, and whereas especially the European were exploring the south, taking observations of the south, like Captain Cook's epic journey, he come to observe a transit of Venus. But Norma, or the right angle, or the carpenter's square. And so this is like a modern example. You got the level as well, so also this particular modern tool, but we have a right angle, 45 degrees, but a ruler as well. Because I've mirrored the image, the letters are backwards, but that's what Norma is, the carpenter's square. But if we look at the older depictions of it, it's a square and a ruler. Weights and measures, objects of the craft. And so where do we have a square? So we have a square here, and we have a square. And if you just Photoshop those onto the top. Now we also have the ruler, the measure tool, the measuring rod, the wand. Wand is an old Greek word for measuring rod, or the reed, which is again so important in the biblical traditions, and basically the Indian temples, all these other temples, you can't live without it. It's an essential tool in civilization. Standard weights and measures, still in this modern day, but also in the ancient economies. Also on this Kershaw drawing, which we have the compass degrees and all these other tools, but we also have a ruler. You can say 15. And again, this is so an important tool. So throughout this Kershaw board, for instance, we have a pointing to the cross staff, the quadrants, and the plumb lines, but we'll come to this, but even how the strings are a little bit serpentine. But Norma, the older ones, the square and the ruler, we have in the boards the square and the ruler, weights and measures. Now, just above Norma, we have Circinus, I'm not sure, Circinus, but what is that? Where we draw on the older art, and it's a set of dividers. So important in, for instance, you see the old sea captains on their map, and still now are, using the dividers to measure out distance. But it also works as a compass, because all you got to do is have a pencil lead or a ink on there, and a set of dividers also becomes a compass. And of course, the compass or dividers is also repeated throughout any standard Freemasonic or the craft tracing board. And so just as an example, and Norma, Circinus, and now we have Triangulum Australe. Again, this modern constellation art, we've lost the original meanings of it, but if we view it there, what we see is it's not like a triangle standard one. We have what it is actually a level, and you can even see that because of serpentine, the plumb line, so that would hang down and create a level, which is important. So this is again since the beginning of time to find your levels, and using this tool. And it also applies to the gromma, which was also used in ancient Egypt as well as a tool of survey and of temple building to find your levels. And you get so high, if you know how to use these very simple tools, you get high levels of accuracy. But you'll also find that, so for instance, in cornerstone ceremonies, Freemasons often preside. We see the square, which we mentioned earlier from Norma. We also see them using this instrument, the level, to find the level of the stone, which is the various depictions, but that's your level there, the plumb line and the horizon. And you can just Photoshop Triangulum Australe on the top, and if that string was left to hang freely, it would create a level. In this, I showed earlier, but this is an old, set of tools. Again, you can see it there. It's a little bit obscured, but that's what we have. And also worth mentioning, because we have these these plumb lines. Now, the quadrant is a way of, like a primitive sextant or an octans. It's a way of measuring degrees, not just for astronomical observations, but also, for instance, with some basic trigonometry, you can work out the height of a tower. If you know how far you are away, and you can view the angle to the top, bang, you know your height. You can also use it for all these sorts of other applications of survey, temple building, but also applies to astronomy as well. And now we have octans. And it's still pretty much true to the original version, but this is also an ancient tool of survey. This one was resting on a table, but this pendulum would sit down the middle, and as you tilt it, now it would give you an angle. You can even see it's got the reticulum. So again, like a very simplistic, like a more simple sextant to measure angles, so the sun or the planets, but also again, you can measure the height of mountains, and with a little bit of, as long as you have an angle and a distance, you can work out using some trig and work out all the rest of it. And even this drawing has these, it's trigonometry there. It's just written in an illustrative form. These are two, so this is a quadrant. Now, Edmund Gunter, who formalised the chain and the mile that we know now in English law under Queen Elizabeth I, this is Gunter's quadrant. You can even see the lines there on this Kershaw drawing, how it has the same basic thing going on, but it's really just one half of a protractor to measure the degrees, and then a plumb line to find the angle. And this is also Gunter's drawing, the cross staff. So what do we have here? A cross staff. And we also have octans there as well, and you can see that dot, that's the plumb line angle as well. So there's but tools of survey, tools of engineering, tools of measurement, and so how octans applies. And again, we see that's, you can just, if I was just to cut out the rest, you probably wouldn't even notice that I had inserted this quadrant into this Kershaw drawing. Over here we have Calum. Now that the image is bent in the modern depictions, but that originally was sets of chisels. Now it's called the inscribers. So when you do what's the term? When you're like you cut a name into inscription, not inscription. When they, anyway, you probably get the idea. But the older again is a set of chisels. Chisels, of course, being essential to the craft and to engineering. And so, for instance, mason boards, you have the chisel and these other tools of the trade of construction in there as well. Now, up above here, okay, I'll pause for a moment and just to separate this into parts. We're approaching the 15-minute mark rather than stick them together. Okay, but we have Columba, and what do we have over here? Columba, the dove with the olive branch. Columba with the olive branch. This is the old art form as well. Columba again with the olive. That's so the UN flag has the 13 olives. You have this 13 olive in all across American church symbolism as well. It's a connection to Columba the dove and to Noah's Ark, and this is another standard feature in mason boards. Noah's Ark, he released the raven and the dove. It's a symbol of hope, but it also connects to Noah's Ark. And Ark of Utnapishtim from Epic of Gilgamesh tells essentially the same flood story. He released a dove, a raven, and a swallow. That's about the only difference in there, and all the weights and measures too. Basically get any Freemason board, you'll see the Ark, and even here on this Templar board or the Temperance Society, the Ark and the dove. It's not exclusive to Freemasons, Oddfellows, all these older craft guilds, esoteric groups have it in there. I mentioned earlier Ara, Ara And okay, I'll